Arianism is named after Arius, the elder, the presbyter, again in Alexandria. Arius was committed to the transcendence of God and to the unity of God. God is one. Who then is this Son? The Son couldn't be God alongside God because then God wouldn't be one. So how can we call Jesus God or Lord? Only in a secondary derivative way, according to Arius. Arius was trying to understand what it meant that the Word became flesh. And here's his proposal. The one God, the true God, who created all things, created his Word as the firstborn of creation. That's language from Colossians. Jesus is the firstborn of all creation. So Arius read that to say that Jesus is a creature. The Word is something that was made, not begotten. And then through the Word, through the Son, God, who you can now call Father, God created all other things. Jesus then is a second-rank demigod, so to speak. You can call him God, but only in an inferior sense to the Father, because the Father is the only one who's uncreated. And it's through the Son that all things are made and that all things relate to the absolutely transcendent one true God. Jesus is our go-between. He's our mediator. He's our buffer. All right? He's like a third party who's in between God and us, representing each to the other. There were times in the 4th century when a majority of the Christians of the Roman Empire were Arians. Why? Why was that so appealing? Well, we live in a hierarchical reality. We live in an order that is structured, and this schema seems to respect that structure. You know, I don't just march into Gail Beebe's office. I make an appointment with his secretary. If you want to email the President of the United States, you're welcome to. I think the email address is president@whitehouse.gov. Be my guest. Barack Obama does not get up early in the morning and read all his emails. You can call the White House if you want. 202-456-1414. The President doesn't answer. An operator answers. We're used to a world like this. That's why my pop culture analogy is Dilbert, this mid-level guy who's in the middle of a big, sprawling, bureaucratic structure. These kinds of structures order all of human life, and so it seems intuitive that God works the same way. And this is actually the logic of Gnosticism, that God creates lesser gods that create lesser gods that create lesser gods that finally create the physical world that we know. So it appeared to Roman culture, which was very hierarchical. It appeals to this day to people because we've never escaped that hierarchical nature of human relationships. It means you can no longer speak univocally and affirm Jesus' divinity. You have to have a little footnote next to the word God or Lord, explaining that there's a radical distinction between the word Lord or God applied to Jesus and the word Lord or God applied to the Father. They can't mean the same thing. Arians would say that Jesus' essence or substance was like the Father's essence or substance. The word homoousios describes similar substance. But see, if that means that if Jesus is similar to the Father, he's also dissimilar. He's also heterousios. He's another substance. And so in Jesus, we are not talking about God himself, not fully, and so really not at all. And the answers back to Arianism are things like this. So God's not on the cross, right? So it's not the Lord himself who takes on our life, takes on our death, takes on our resurrection. It's a functionary who's below God who does all that. We don't really know God when we know Jesus. Because God, strictly speaking, is unknowable. See, the whole story starts going in different directions. The cross comes to mean something else. The knowledge of God that the apostles think they have turns out not to be a knowledge of the real God. We use the word mediator, and so it sounds like Jesus is someone other than God who's stepping in as a go-between, right? That's how you do third-party arbitration, right? You pick a disinterested party who's not on your side, not on God's side, and they represent each one to the other. The word mediator sounds Aryan, but Jesus is not a third party. He is on both sides. He is a member of both parties, and so he's an appropriate representative of each to the other because he embodies each to the other and in the other. That's a different kind of mediator, right? You could call Arianism a perfect blend of adoptionism on the one hand and docetism on the other hand. He seems human but isn't. And he's not really God. The church dubbed Arianism the arch heresy because it seemed to combine what was wrong with all of them in a totally appealing package. And this logic still appeals. Jehovah's Witnesses are a movement with the same Bible, although they have to translate a few verses differently because there are a few verses that just don't admit to an Arian interpretation, like John 1:1. They have to say, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was a God, which is a notion completely foreign to the rest of the Gospel of John. Nevertheless, they have the same 66 books in their Bibles. But they think the Arians got a bad rap. They think the Arians in the 4th century they should have won. Jehovah's Witnesses treat Jesus as just a temporary embodiment of the Archangel Michael. In an Apollinarian fashion, took on a human body and lived a human life and slipped out of it before his death on the cross. And is no longer Jesus, is merely Michael again. And the only name for God then is not Jesus, it's Yahweh, it's Jehovah. And they will only worship the God of Israel who is not Jesus, the Father. But they mean something different by Father because the Father is merely a word for creator. It leaves the old relationships as really the only relationships, that God is our creator and nothing more. Mary is not God's mother. Mary just bears a temporary manifestation of an archangel. God is still simply creator. We are simply creatures. We are not brothers and sisters, father and children, etc. All right? Where do I see Arianism in non-Arian circles? Where in Orthodox Trinitarian Christian circles do we have some Arian tendencies? Well, have you heard Jesus portrayed as having a different character than the Father? Or have you even just sort of absorbed that or thought it up yourself? That what keeps us from being wiped out by this angry Father is this merciful Son, who's a sympathetic character, who knows us, who loves us, and who absorbs the wrath of the Father for our sake. A portrayal that ends up portraying the Son and the Father as different. Not just different persons, but different kinds of persons. with different qualities. Wrath belongs to the first person of the Trinity, so-called Trinity, but mercy and grace and love to the second person. You can't relate to the first person, so you relate to the second person who relates for you to the first person. That, I think, is functional Arianism. It's training us away from seeing the Father in the Son, away from seeing in the love of Jesus the love of the Father. John 3:16 doesn't read, Jesus so loved the world that he gave himself to save us from the Father. God so loved the world. Here meaning the Father loved the world in this way, that he gave his only Son. And Jesus, as often as not, has a problem with the people around him, including his own disciples. He's not compromising. He's uncompromising. He's just merciful. He's just gracious. So don't think of the Father and the Son as different kinds of personalities or different or persons with different characters. What you've done is you've created two different substances. What you've done is what the Arians have done. Athanasius puts it this way: everything you say about the Father, you can say about the Son, except that the Son is not the Father. All right? Everything you can say about the Son, you can say about the Father, except the Father isn't the Son. Doctrine of the Trinity is coming next, so we'll unpack that. But just know what I told you early on, and what I'm going to tell you again in a minute. In Jesus, Israel saw its God. In Jesus, the disciples saw the God of Israel. They didn't see someone who was different from the God of Israel, or was close to the God of Israel, or closer to the God of Israel. They saw the Lord himself. Jesus is the Lord, not just a Lord. And so when you know Jesus, you know the Lord. When you receive Jesus' heart, you have received and learned the heart of the Father.